Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan, and I am calling you today from Wilmington, Delaware.
Wow. How far is that from Dover, the base?
About an hour down Route 1.
Cool. I went
Yeah.
shopping there one day at the PX. Oh, I
Yeah,
love
we're in between Baltimore and Philly. People kind of forget about us, but that's okay.
I love it. So tell me about your past leading up into your present, Cameron.
Yeah, so I started out life in the performing arts, and I started writing and doing business writing stuff in 2005 when I was 17. I would just answer Craigslist ads for people that needed stuff written, and no one asked over the email if I was a high school student, so didn't matter. And so that's how I kind of got my start writing. And then I worked in magazines. I ran my first magazine when I was 21. Then I moved over to nightlife and fashion from politics, and did that for about 3 years, which is really cool. I got to do fashion and hang out in nightclubs and nightlife and stay out till 5 o'clock in the morning and all that type of thing. And then when that magazine ended, I didn't really want to go back to politics and campaigns the way I had been. And I had left the Republican Party at that time anyway, so I was kind of done with that whole world. But I had a lot of things and ideas that I wanted to write about, things that I'd seen in the Tea Party movement, in the Occupy Wall Street movement in Denver, all these things that I hadn't really written about because I had been in nightlife and that wasn't that world and that content. So I started writing that. I started writing fiction. So in 2014, I started what would become the Cameron Journal at CameronJournal.com. And I started working on fiction. And several years later, I released my first novel, Cast Iron, which is about a young man who kills his stepfather with a cast iron frying pan for molesting his sister and his life afterwards. And then I followed that up a couple months later with a short story collection, which is a companion of 14 short stories about various and sundry things, one of which, Beverly Gardens, about the California housing crisis, was published in 34th Parallel magazine. So you can find my work at CameronJournal.com. I also sometimes publish elsewhere, like Brains Magazine. I had an article come out this week about how your fashion tells a story. And I've been doing a series of articles on storytelling, and this week I'm talking about how your fashion tells a story and why what you wear matters. And then obviously, the Cameron Journal is a digital first publication, also a podcast, which is on every service and on YouTube in video form, and video on Spotify if you use Spotify. So it's been a crazy ride. We were talking beforehand. I've run fashion shows. I've been an actor. I was a headlining stand-up comedian in the Colorado area for a while. I used to own a record label for a little bit. I've done a lot of stuff, but kind of always in the creative arts and industries and all that sort of thing. And now I'm at the Cameron Journal at something or other publishing, doing books and anthologies.
Tell me about your books. How many books have you written? That's what I mean.
I have right now. I have 3 out published. I have 2 coming out this fall, and I have another 2 that are finished, and I am currently editing and revising. So,
Okay, and
and I have planned books published every year until 2027.
I love that. Tell me about the political and the AI, the geopolitical and the AI excerpts from the books that we talked about before the show.
Yeah, so one of the big things that everyone I'm sure is kind of aware of AI through either Midjourney or ChatGPT, or you work at a business that's incorporating AI. Um, my next book, What the Hell is Going On, Post COVID Edition, which is kind of a reprint and update of my very first book, What the Hell is Going On, A Primer to Our World in the Age of Trump. Um, through cybersecurity and some other things, gets in a little bit into AI. As far as geopolitics goes, there's a great essay on domestic terrorism and why we need more surveillance for that stuff. But
I
as I'm sure everybody knows, there's a lot of um, going on in the world. We have the situation in Ukraine, we have the situation in Israel with Gaza and the Palestinians, and those conflicts are very emblematic of, you know kind of what's going to be going on in the world moving forward. And that means for businesses, a lot of supply chain disruption. It's going to mean a lot of, money spent on military hardware. It's going to mean inflation. And it's going to mean, kind of a less stable world to do business in, which is very different than what we've had for about the last 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Yes, as far and how everything going on physically in the planet conflict wise interacts with, the coming of AI, which according to one of the open AI experts, we could have an AI superintelligence by next year.
Yes, I read that.
Yes.
That.
Yes, I watched that complete interview. That, I mean, there already have been some massive layoffs from AI. The freelance writing business is gone, functionally speaking, thanks to ChatGPT and other services like that. And so we're in for some interesting times ahead. If people were hoping the post-pandemic period would be some type of return to normalcy, they're going to be severely disappointed. Because the pandemic fast forwarded almost every trend we didn't think we would see till the 2030s. And it kind of held a lid on everything for a little while. And now there's kind of this explosion afterwards. And there's going to be a lot of things moving and changing. So my only advice is stay resilient, stay adaptable, stay flexible. Because those things are going to be what saves us in business, in life, and all sorts of things, moving forward. So, at a personal level, I would try to, avoid a lot of personal debt anywhere you can, which is very hard with inflation right now. There it may be a situation where a lot of people may be moving because of a climate issue or because of an economic issue or just simply to find work. It's not going to quite be a big panacea like the Great Depression where we photograph it by Dorothea Lange and write about it. But there's, you may end up in a situation where a cross-country move needs to happen or something else. And that's really unfamiliar. Yeah, that's really unfamiliar for a lot of people. Americans haven't really lived like that since about the 50s and 60s. And so, and there's that tension. People want to stay in your family for kids, for family, for help, for that interdependency. But if your family is not located anywhere near a place where the jobs are, it can be hard to survive economically. So my advice at a personal level with all these changes is stay resilient, stay adaptable, stay flexible. And what the hell is going on post-COVID edition talks about that a lot, especially with capitalism, education, some of these other things. Kind of gives you an overview of here's what's happening, here's what's going on, not necessarily how to prepare for it, but I also believe knowledge is power. When you understand how these things and systems are working, you can find your own way in your own corner to move something forward for you and your family.
Well said, Cameron. We got a lot of subjects to hit. I was going to do a 30-minute show, but we're about to talk for a whole hour. Are you down for that?
That's totally fine. Please go ahead.
Great. So, domestic terrorism. Needing more security.
Yes.
Tell me my opinion before you go on, because I know you have a lot to talk about. My opinion is you're right. We need more security. NSA needs to step up and start showing us what security systems they have. Like, for instance, my neighbor, Marty Kaiser, they made enemy of the state about him. That was about my neighbor. And so I know what NSA can do, but it's no such agency. So they're out of the realm of the FBI and CIA, but they do surveillance us. So what I want to know is why can't they get into the government or however this is set up so that we can be more safer with terrorism going on? Because if we don't, phase one is when they're zombie-like sitting up there smoking crack and methamphetamines. Phase two is when they start fighting the cops, which we're in phase two because people are fighting the cops. Phase three is like, it's going to be like Iraq and Afghanistan. People are blowing up cars. There's martyrs or bombs everywhere. You don't know where to go. What is your opinion?
Well, to some degree, the bombings have already started. In the Christmas Day of 2021, a very large bomb went off and blew out every window in downtown Nashville, and it was barely a news story, got no attention, and the only reason it didn't is because no one died because it was Christmas Day and everyone was home. Um, and there's recent historical precedent for this. There was the troubles in Ireland with the IRA. Italy had a series of suicide bombings in the 1970s from resistance groups. This is not a new phenomenon. The United States is one of the few major industrialized powers that doesn't have a dedicated domestic surveillance agency for domestic terrorism. Most European countries do, even Canada does, even Australia does. Um, Unfortunately, we have the FBI, and that's fine, but the FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They're the cleanup operation after the incident happens. We tried to turn them into an intelligence agency post 9/11, and it failed miserably. The Bush administration failed miserably trying to turn it into an intelligence operation. And the CIA is banned from working in the United States unless they're working with an FBI agent. If you want to see a very realistic way that works, go watch a movie called Sicario. It has an excellent way of how that happens with the drug war. The reality is we need a dedicated agency whose job it is to look after domestic terror groups, especially with the rise of these local militias who tend to be far right wing, who tend to be white supremacist, or at least, adjacent to that sort of thing. The FBI, has lists and kind of keeps an eye on those folks and all this type of thing, but there's not necessarily the type of surveillance that there would be in other countries. Even on the left, when you have some of these environmental groups that do really terrible things or sabotage or this type of thing, oftentimes it catches us unawares. And so I did my first graduate degree at Norwich University, and I studied terrorism and asymmetrical warfare. I was actually the first class that had that degree concentration for international relations. And so the essay in my book, What the Hell is Going On, is basically I took a long paper I wrote about domestic terrorism in grad school, made it not sound like it was written for grad school, zhuzhed it up a little bit, and kind of modernized it, because I wrote that way back in 2011, so I had to kind of update all of that, and then say, this is still an important kind of thing that we have never done. And in all the things that we've done in the post 9/11 world and this type of thing, what we're not doing is we're not keeping an eye on, the Patriot Front, Ohio, that is a very well organized far right militia. A lot of these groups and things, we're just not keeping the eye on those that we really should, and it's really becoming a security problem. We talk about safety and lowering crime in American cities and all this type of thing. Getting better at that sort of thing is how you start to bring those crime rates down, break up those gangs before they get too out of control, like MS-13 in California that started, I believe, in the Salvadoran prison system. So
Well, tell me about, you really didn't hit the subject, which means it's not that you said something wrong, but you said something great, educating me every day. So NSA, and now I'm gonna say, what is your input on NSA, and then the grid system? The grid system meaning the electrical system, how people has been tampering with the electrical buildings. Tell me about that.
There were 3 instances of that, one of which was in the Pacific Northwest, actually. Unfortunately, when it comes to the electric grids, there were 3 instances. One was in Washington, one was in North Carolina. There was another one, I forget where it was. Those sites are basically unwatched. We kind of depend on people to just not screw with them, and now they finally are, so that's an area for more surveillance. As far as the NSA goes, it's going to be very hard to make a public case for the NSA getting involved in surveillance because of the scandal that happened during the Obama administration, where they were found to be tracking phone metadata from Americans when they legally did not have the mandate to do so. And that was started under the Bush administration, stayed through the Obama administration. It was supposedly shut down before the 2012 election, but no one really knows if that was a thing or not. And so,
for security, though, do you think?
Well, this is the balance. No, I mean, but here, this is the balance. This is where this is a struggle in this country. This is the balance we have to strike. In a free society, you want to be free enough to have your free speech, do what you want to do, is your rights of a free citizen, all this type of thing. But we also don't want to live in a third world PvP zone. Right. So, we need to find that balance of, can we use the amorphous technologies available to the NSA, which includes cyber warfare. Most of that comes out of NSA. That includes, phone metadata, tracking phone calls, all this type of thing, tracking financial payments. A lot of that comes out of NSA. There's a really great guy on TikTok called That Intel Guy that used to work there. You should follow him. He and I did a video together on the show. It was great.
I do it right now.
Yeah, and all that type of thing. So it's striking that and doing that, but while also not infringing upon the real freedoms of Americans. And that's where Canada, the UK, France, who have these type of agencies, they have different legal structures and things, and their constitutions are different, so they can do a little bit more than we can. But I think it's long past time in this country, especially given the fact that people are going after transformers, power lines, electrical grid stuff, all of which is open, very little security. Half of it's in the middle of nowhere, so there's no one to see you if there's not a camera or something like that. Maybe that's where AI could be helpful in, keeping an eye out on such things. That's the type of thing where, yes, if we had a more robust domestic security intelligence type of agency, we might have been able to see those attacks coming, or stop the guy who decided to blow up downtown Nashville on Christmas Day because he's not a fan of Santa Claus or whatever, like all that type of thing. Like, that is where an agency would actionably help in those things. That's why I bring up things like MS-13. A lot of these things, a lot of times when you talk about these things, especially when I'm talking about these things in communities of color, everyone immediately sits back and like, oh, hell no, we've been there, done that. Does everyone remember when they blew up 6 blocks of Philadelphia to get rid of MOVE in the 80s? Like, we've been there, done that in communities of color for a long time. And I say, here's the thing. It's also communities of color that get adversely impacted when these things get out of control, because they tend to happen in lower income areas, areas of poverty, or they happen to vulnerable populations because they're vulnerable populations. So as difficult as it might be to embrace a little bit more security state, when it comes to domestic surveillance and intelligence for these, extremist groups, regardless of your political persuasion, it's still an important thing to have if it's run well within the right legal structure with the appropriate oversight. And we have other models in other peer countries to look from to possibly create that.
To piggyback off of you, I think super intelligence coming out is going to be wonderful. And I think if they mesh it with the NSA and they understand and come out with laws that allow NSA to monitor us, I think we should be monitored once we leave our houses. Not everyone, but if they start acting suspicious in malls where they breaking glass, getting jewelry, or going underneath somebody's car, putting a metal detector under it. These are the things that happen. You don't know.
Shooting synagogues, shooting up schools, shooting up movie theaters. I mean, all of the, yes. I mean, there is, and there are other countries like the UK that have been embracing a surveillance type of society since the late 90s. That's been very common, especially in London, not just the city of London, but Greater London, the county, the home counties. They've been had embraced that for a long time. Same thing in France, same thing elsewhere. Security cameras are visible in the public, can't miss them, they're there, they're a regular part of life. That's really unfamiliar for a lot of Americans. It gets a little big daddy government's watching type of thing. But the reality is some of these, especially these asymmetrical mass violent crimes type of thing, that's how you start to begin to stop those things, slow them down, get better intelligence, and stop them before they start. Imagine if we'd been able to stop the guy who shot that country concert atop Mandalay Bay, and there was all sorts of signs and things. And it's a casino. They have security cameras everywhere in casinos. I mean, everywhere, every hallway, everything. And there were still lots and lots of missed signs with that guy. I can't help but think an equipped domestic intelligence agency wouldn't be able to do something more about that. And also, and I'm not saying that it should be a singular thing given all the power. It needs to coordinate between federal agencies and local agencies and all this type. There definitely needs to be coordination and transparency to make it work. France has showed us that, so has Canada, but it's still a very necessary thing, and it's something that we just don't have. And I think the real lesson out of that is we don't have to live this way. we really
Well,
don't.
okay, so we spent 20 minutes talking about that. Let's go into the vulnerability of drugs and the Ukraine and the Palestinians. Do you not
Right.
understand that there's a war going on? There's been a war, a mini war, but now there's a large war going on between the Palestinians and Ukraine. The bad people, not the good people, but I'm excluding the good people for the bad people coming in talking about ISIS and everything, just holding up flags, trying to kill Ukrainians, trying to kill Palestinians, and there's just a war in the United States. So what I would like to know is, when is enough enough? What is your input?
I mean, it's never enough in a country where we have open discussion as to decide how much we should or should not be backing these conflicts. Ukraine has turned into a proxy war with Russia. We're basically at war with Russia, and Ukrainians are doing the dying. As far as the situation in Gaza with the Palestinians, Hamas, and Israel wants to drive out Hamas once and for all because October 7th was so traumatizing. I understand that impulse. Unfortunately, they're killing a lot of innocent bystanders while they do it, and they're doing it at the American taxpayer expense, and they're doing it with American equipment that's built in
Yes.
Ohio and Indiana and places like that. And so, unfortunately, both of these conflicts, although they are separate, both of them are victim to our current ideological battles politically in this country. It is interesting the Republican Party is taking the side of Russia. Ronald Reagan is turning over in his grave. On that side, and that's mostly about cost. The Ukraine war has definitely run into money. We've spent about $200 billion fighting the war in Ukraine, and that is not going down anytime soon. The Palestinian situation is already well over $100 billion. So we're spending a lot of money, fighting these wars and conflicts and all this type of thing. Ukraine versus Russia. Russia is finally suing for some sort of ceasefire. That mostly has to do with the fact that we have banned Russia from using the US dollar in any of its transactions, which basically cuts Russia out of the international trade system. They can't sell their oil at a profit, and they can't sell it in dollars. So that's, I think, why Russia is going for a ceasefire. As far as the situation in Gaza goes, Israel's going to take it as far as we will let them. And I think the good thing that they have done is they have taken Hamas down several pegs. It will be a long time before Hamas is able to mount anything like what they did in October again. The downside is that there is no more Gaza. There's no more West Bank. Any land the Palestinians once had is either been settled on the West Bank, or in the case of Gaza, is now under occupation. The only way that conflict ends is if there is a specific and designated homeland for Palestinians. That's what Saudi Arabia is pushing for right now. It needs to be a two-state solution. It needs to happen now. Whether Israel will ever go along with that remains a question. Tel Aviv has been silent on that subject. But the reality, for better or for worse, is that's kind of where the games are at. I think Ukraine, because it's been going on longer, will probably end first, because Russia will want some sort of ceasefire, because they're not going to be able to afford to maintain this war for very much longer. Gaza, as far as the Palestinians, Hamas, and Israel goes, that depends on a great many factors. One is American public opinion, which still remains on the side of Israel, but we've had those campus protests. Anyone under 40 does not view that conflict the same way people over 40 do. I think if the Saudis can get some sort of agreement on a Palestinian state as part of their normalization of relations with Israel, I think that will be about as close to peace in the Middle East as we're going to get for about the next century. But there is an opportunity here to make that happen. And I think if the Biden administration can pull it off, it will probably be the biggest thing to happen in that region since Carter signed the Camp David Accords in the 70s with Egypt.
Well said. Well said. You know your history, and I'm learning from you. So Ukraine, I did some stories about that. And Ukraine is a good place. There was pregnant women getting C-sections, getting blown up, and everything, and then there's money like well documented, but it's just so much money being invested in Ukraine for weapons and not the people. Because when a person dies, if a stimulus check goes to them, it's going back to the government. It's not going to them.
Well, and
So
you've had a huge immigrant crisis come out of Ukraine as well. People have fled to Poland, they've fled elsewhere in Europe, all this type of thing. So you've had a tremendous fleeing of people, huge brain drain. People left Russia because they have all the sanctions, all this type of thing. So you've had this just flood of Russians and Russian Ukrainians out into the rest of Europe and to the United States. It's gotten so bad that Ukrainians are flying to Mexico City, taking a bus to the border and walking across with
whoa,
America. Yes.
whoa.
Yes, I mean it is, and no, I mean obviously the money's not. I mean Ukraine is in a war; it's in a fight for its life. So obviously the money's not being spent with the people. The biggest problem with Ukraine I hear about in this country is people look outside and say things in the United States are not bad, but Ukraine's getting another 60 billion and more weapons and all this type of thing. So most of the complaints I hear about Ukraine have to do with the fact that we're spending a lot of money on this proxy war in Russia, and it's costing us at home. And the sad fact of the matter is that conflict is going to continue until Putin finally sees reason and realizes he can't just annex it. And the rebuilding of Ukraine and its eventual ascension to the EU is going to be Europe's problem. We'll win the war for Ukraine, but the rebuilding is going to be a problem solved in Berlin and Paris and Rome.
So Biden, what is your input on Biden? I know you don't like the laws or the structure of Donald Trump. We're going to work in a bipartisan way on this, but tell me, Biden has been sending money over there when there's a war, and there has been war brewing here. There's been many wars going on. So tell me, what's your pros and cons on both the former president and President Biden?
In my mind, there's no contest. Trump is not running to be president of the United States. He's running to be dictator. And they're not even being quiet about that anymore. They're making it quite obvious. They're running to be dictator. They're running for blood, and anyone who doesn't disagree with them, who's a high-profile public figure, they want to arrest, put in jail, and/or kill, and probably some combination of all three. Which is the most un-American thing that we can possibly imagine. Nothing like that has gone on since the Revolution, and that was almost 300 years ago.
Do you have a FACT about this? Like,
yes, go listen to Steve Bannon's speech at CPAC last weekend.
Okay.
Donald Trump himself has said this is about revenge, and he has named names of people remember the lock her up chant from 2016? This has always been their agenda. They're just getting more blatant. So for me, the decision is not between two reasonable presidential candidates with different policies. A vote for Trump is a vote for long-term dictatorship under Trump and the entire conservative machine he has behind him. Or if you would like to continue to have elections and some semblance of Republican, small r Republican democracy in this country, then I suggest you hold your nose and vote for Joe Biden. I understand Biden's unpopularity. I know why he's unpopular. I know why people are unhappy. Unfortunately, we're at one of those points in American history, much like 1812, 1836, 1840, and 1860, and even arguably 1932, where who you vote for really matters this time, in terms of there will be fundamental structural systemic shifts depending on who's in power moving forward. A vote for Biden, as much as I'm not necessarily a huge fan of his, I'm not a fan of every one of the policies they put through, I'm not a fan of necessarily the economy that they have created and what they've done with that. A vote for Biden is a vote for a continuation of democratic government. A vote for Trump is a vote for dictatorship. You vote for Trump in 2024 and he wins, that's the last election we're going to have until he's dead, and maybe not even then. It's really that simple. This one's not complicated. Steve Bannon's coming out talking about it's revenge, it's dictatorship. Trump literally has said he wants to be dictator for only one day, but I think the first part of the statement is more true than the second part of the statement. They want to change this country from the bottom up. And which means if you are a minority or a vulnerable group, you're going to be the first to go, because those are always the first people to go when these things happen.
Well, what he wants to do is help, I'm not arguing, this is just a debate. But what he wants to do is help the African American race, because 100 years we've been living in poverty. And my next question is the drugs. The drugs flooding the lower class communities. He wants to clean that up. Washington, D.C. is just so dirty right now. It's
Mhm.
messed up. People are camping out right next to the White House or the Capitol. I can't remember
Yeah.
which one. And it's just terrible. He's allowing people to come through our borders and terrorize. One case was a white woman got killed by a cartel member, and they arrested him. And they're tired of having to do this. They're being sacrificed. So, what's your point? What's your input?
Well, I would say that when it comes to the immigration situation, if Trump thinks he can solve both the war on drugs that's been going on since Nixon and the immigration problem that's been going on since 1975, he had 4 years to do it and couldn't be bothered. So
But there was a big debate.
another 4 years, he somehow is going to have a magical solution that doesn't involve standing in Texas with a fence he can't afford to build. I
That's true.
mean,
It
I mean,
costs
I
$5
mean, I'm not.
billion.
I'm not saying these problems don't need to be solved.
Yeah,
I just seriously question their ability to actionably do anything. Minus the fact when it comes to immigration, you have two structural problems. One, you have a tremendous appetite for drugs in this country, which is really a mental health, education, and socioeconomic
I
issue,
like that.
which could be
Yes.
helped with some decent social programs. And the other problem is you have corporate America that's addicted to cheap immigrant labor. And that goes from strawberry picking in California to H-1B visas at
Yeah.
Microsoft. Throughout the system, corporate America is addicted to cheap immigrant labor. If you really want to solve either of those problems, you need decent social programs, and you need to make it so painful that corporate America cannot hire those people anymore, and that will stem the flow. By the way, to be fair and bipartisan, neither party has suggested we do either of these things. No one is actually suggesting solutions because it's not in the interest of anyone to solve either of these problems. The banks make too much money from drug money that they launder, and we know that they do it. They have been sued and fined multiple times for laundering drug money. Corporate America wants cheap immigrant labor, so corporate America is going to not let the government do anything that's going to keep them from their cheap immigrant labor. So you have giant forces at work who want to make sure that those things never get solved. And the unfortunate reality, to your point, is that vulnerable communities of color are the ones that are oftentimes impacted with these things. However, returning to the presidential election, I still think even though wages for African Americans went up under Trump, and he says he wants to do a lot of things and all this type of thing, I would rather have a democracy going forward than whatever crazy idea Trump has that he thinks can help us. There's a long tradition of people coming into Black churches, making a lot of big Trump promises to the Black community, and very rarely do those things ever actually end up happening.
How
I
about
would
this?
say, I wouldn't. We've had him for 4 years, and what did we really get? Not much.
Can I ask you something? You have a plan. Let me give you an example. You have a
Yeah,
plan. You said everything that should be done in corporate America doing illegal immigrants or cheap labor for migrants, or however you said it. I was listening.
yeah, yeah,
But on the contrary, it's like Donald Trump, he wants to help Black people. He sat up there for 4 years sending money to colleges, and then on top of that, him, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer got into a huge debate about the wall. It cost $5 million to build the wall, and they wouldn't build the wall. And now all of a sudden, the wall, half of the wall is built, and Biden won't invest in nothing else. So that's my point that I'm getting at. What is your input?
I mean, the wall is a nice symbol. I always laugh when we have this conversation because when I was in debate club, when I was 14 years old, I suggested building a concrete and metal wall on the southern border, and everyone thought I was being ridiculous and extra and so stupid. And I'm looking at this now being like I want to call on my old debate team and be kind of like, what now? Like, what do you think about this now? Like, this is now a huge national debate. Like, Cameron and his silly, stupid wall. Like, I mean, but the sad thing is most immigrants come by air or by boat, and the cartels are very good at digging tunnels. So any sort of physical barrier on a border that, by the way, is 2,500 miles long over some of the most rugged terrain and a river along the way is honestly probably not the most effective solution. You know what does work really well, though? Making sure that Border Patrol is well funded and the salaries are good. That works really well.
So why are we sending money to Ukraine, 200 billion, when we should be sending money to the U.S. Border Patrol and Homeland Security to build them up?
Well, therein is the argument that all this money is going to these overseas conflicts, not that we don't have enough problems here. And I would say, yes, it would be good to make sure that we're funding Homeland Security and all this type of thing. Here's the sad reality. If we had allowed Russia to entirely annex Ukraine more than Obama let them annex Crimea in 2013, if that would bring Russia up to the border with Poland. And that would basically precipitate a timer on how long it is before a direct conflict. Well, here's the problem. Poland's a NATO country. So when Poland and Russia start sharing a border again, which they have not since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the timer starts on how long before you end up a war between Russia and NATO. The advantage of keeping the war kind of over there in the eastern part of Ukraine towards Russia is it prevents that conflict from becoming more into NATO than it already has been. It's basically conflict mitigation. And unfortunately, because this is the real world and this is the real life, we have to do both we have to try to do both as best we can with the resources we have at the same time. Because if Putin had been allowed to annex Ukraine, somebody else would have been next. And the reality is if they tried to annex Poland, Poland's a NATO country, they can trigger Article 5 and all nations have to go to war to stop the threat, which means you have a direct war with Russia. When Ukraine, it's just HIMARS and Patriot missile systems. It's kind of a low-level conflict. If we get involved directly, it's B-52s carpet bombing Russian positions in Ukraine. It's F-35s dodging Russian radar and going on sortie missions in Western Russia. It becomes a much larger, protracted, expensive, possibly nuclear conflict. So as much as it seems like it's a waste of money, it's actually saving us from a greater conflict that would kill more of us. And I've been making that argument since the earliest days of the war in Ukraine. And this is where geopolitics gets messy and doesn't fit into nice, neat little buckets. So my argument would be, yeah, would I like to have sent that $200 million to the Homeland Security and the border and Border Patrol so we could have a more robust southern border? Yes, absolutely. Mexico's doing a great job, but they need more resources. However, I also don't want to find out how many of Russia's ICBMs still work. You know,
3 things I want to say. Why don't we send money to 200 billion plus some to Ukraine, but also invest, because we're in a deficit anyway. Send more money to the U.S. Border Patrol and invest in our military, because China's military is like so sharp. And then the next thing, I was wondering about the oh my God, you caught me with this one. You really did, because I'm trying to pick up on everything you say. Oh yeah, the grid system. We were talking about the grid system, and in Russia, I read somewhere Russia said that they would bomb if we keep interfering. They would bomb literally our electrical system, and it takes seven major electrical systems for them to wipe out everything. Tesla cars not working, everything not working. What is your input on that?
Russia doesn't need to bomb the U.S. electrical grid. They'll just hack it. One, they can't bomb it because they're long-range bombers. We don't know if they necessarily work anymore and where would the fuel come from, and there's issues with that. But they didn't bother with all of that. They could just hack it, and we know that they can do that. That's a well-known capability we know that they have. We've known that for some time. To your point, the NSA has been working on that for almost 15 years. Now, here, to the credit of the Trump administration, here's something Trump did that was not dumb. He completely reorganized U.S. Cyber Command and gave the generals in Cybersecurity Command a lot more power, both defensively and offensively, to protect U.S. interests. And Trump, that's one of the subjects that Trump, I think, actually really cares about, because he talks about it consistently for more than a day. And he knew it was very important. He thinks it's very important. They made changes in the military to do that better. And so I'm reasonably confident with that. Here's the thing you have to remember when you read things about Putin. Putin likes to saber rattle. He likes to generate very scary headlines in Western newspapers. And when he comes out and says, oh, I might have to use a nuclear weapon or a tactical field nuke, or I might have to bomb, the Texas Exchange or whatever have you, that generates very scary headlines in Le Monde and The Guardian and the New York Times and the LA Times and the Washington Post. And Putin likes that type. It's an old-fashioned KGB propaganda trick. They did it in improv for years and years and years to their own people. So anything time you read a headline like that, don't take it terribly seriously. Because for one, he would have to contend with U.S. air defense to begin to do that, and Russia's technology is 25 years out of date. That's the first problem. The second problem is Putin knows this, he does not have to bother with an old-fashioned bombing. He has some very smart people in a building called the FSB in downtown Moscow with a lot of laptops who can hack into the U.S. power grid if he so chooses. And then it becomes a war of the wire, not a war of the air.
Aren't they a part of the Kremlin? Like this agency?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, tell me this then. The balloons floating around in the United States of America.
From China, yes.
All I want to know is your input. Tell me about that.
I think China likes to try to do things to see what will happen because their capabilities are so limited. China likes to brag about how big their military is, which this happened since Mao. That's not new. But the reality is their ships can't go about more than 1,000 kilometers from their own shores because they don't have the logistics to refuel them, and they have very few nuclear-powered ships. That's the first problem. The second problem is their capabilities of being able to meaningfully reach out and touch the United States are very limited because their equipment tends to be behind, and most of the technology they stole from us. So the old adage goes, China hasn't invented that yet because the United States, they haven't stolen it from the United States yet. So that, I think the balloon incident, I mean, we don't know how much Xi Jinping is actually in charge of China these days because he doesn't talk to anyone. He literally came to San Francisco, and Joe Biden was telling Xi Jinping about stuff that he did not know, which was very disturbing for all parties involved, I'm sure. I was telling someone last night, I'm like, I would have loved to know what he said on the car ride back to the airport to his staff. So I think the balloon incident was them literally running a test balloon to see how we would react. Now, I have a lot of right-wing friends who freaked out and was like, they let it fly over major military installations and blah, blah. I'm kind of like, okay, here's the thing. China also has satellites. They also have a phone line that goes to Moscow, who also has satellites. The balloon was literally a test balloon to find out what the United States would do. So they got some great pictures of ICBM missile covers in Nebraska. They could have bought those on the dark web anyway. Nothing was terribly gained, nothing was lost. What's hilarious is that we sent a $110 million airplane to shoot down a balloon that might have cost $1,000 to make. Like that, talk about overkill. That's what $150 billion a year military budget will buy you. So I wasn't that terribly concerned about that. I think there are probably going to be some more instances like that. I think it's interesting that, North Korea is sending balloons of garbage to South Korea. I think it's North Korea trying to pretend like they're China. So they just kind of empty the dumpster into these bags. No, seriously, they fly over the DMZ and the South Korean military shoots them down to see what they are. And it's just like, trash. It's just garbage. They just took somebody's household bag. It's like if I took the trash bag in your house, tied some balloons to it, and just sent it out there. I mean, I think that's them trying to copy China, but I'm not terribly concerned about that stuff. With China, you have to keep an eye on the Taiwan situation. But right now,
You read my
The biggest
mind.
vulnerable in China is one thing, and his name is Xi Jinping. He has consolidated power. He has made everyone around him afraid to tell him the truth, which means he is the head of a country he's not actually running. You think we have a debt problem in this country? China has an unknowably deep debt problem in its real estate market that could, if not properly deflated and managed, end China as an industrial power. So I don't worry about China because, quite frankly, they have bigger problems. And China saw what happened in Ukraine and how a lot of the world mobilized against Russia and has isolated them. China cannot afford that isolation. They're an export-based manufacturing economy. That amount of isolation would kill them. Their currency is pegged to the US dollar. Any sort of actual provocation that would make Washington too unhappy would end China as a power. China knows this. So to some degree, China has to keep sweet. And that's why the meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping was moved from Beijing to San Francisco. Xi Jinping had to come say he's sorry.
Well said, Cameron. I have another question. You were talking about Taiwan. As I was writing down Taiwan, we have a connection. So I wanted to know about when Nancy Pelosi went all the way to Taiwan to meet the female president of Taiwan, because what happened was, but I'm telling the audience, what happened was there was trying to move this ships closer, sort of like what Putin did when the war first started, because Putin kept saying there is no war, there's not going to be no war, but they were doing exercises outside of there. So tell me, if this is a country that make microchips, and we're about to start making microchips,
we are, yeah.
What is your input on the rise and fall, or maybe a rise of Taiwan?
Well, there's a long history with Taiwan. So Taiwan was formed by Chinese nationalist separatists who lost the war in mainland China and fled the communist regime under Mao to the island of Formosa that we call Taiwan in the West. And that was in 1948. So it has been the official policy of the CCP, the Communist People's Republic of China, that Taiwan is a breakaway province that is part of China, and they will one day bring their government and that back into line. China made a mistake.
How?
When the British lease in Hong Kong ended in 1997, and Hong Kong returned to be part of China, and China announced 2 systems, 1 government would be the new policy. Hong Kong will be able to keep its democratic elements, but under the mainland Chinese flag. If they had seriously managed that to where Hong Kong had the suitable amount of autonomy and no security crackdowns and all the stuff that happened about 2016, 2017, 2018 in Hong Kong with those big protests and everything, where China basically threw out the entire Hong Kong government to install their own lackeys. If China had played their cards different and really gotten serious about the 2 systems, 1 government, they probably could have convinced the Taiwanese, who at the time, before Hong Kong happened in the 2010s, were maybe convinced a sort of 2 systems, 1 government thing could work, sort of thing. When China cracked down on Hong Kong, it made it very clear to the Taiwanese there would never be a 2 systems, 1 government with Taiwan. It's a 1 system, 1 government.
It was supposed to be a 2 system with Hong Kong and China, and it did not work. So therefore, Taiwan don't want to be a part of China.
You got it. Exactly. It's the same thing like in church when you're supposed to have the traditional service and then the praise service, and they start bleeding into each other. Same problem, but just nations. And so so now Taiwanese public opinion is absolutely not. We will never come back. And so now you have this this real tension. You have this implicit guarantee of security from the United States, but also with a mind. And one of the reasons why we're building semiconductor chip plants here in America is Taiwan is hard to defend. It's very close to China. It's not that far. It's only about 200 kilometers offshore. And it's very hard to defend. It would be a very expensive war. There's a nuclear potential, as China is a nuclear power.
Can I
and that supply chain is long even when you're coming from Guam and Japan. So I think the reason they're building those plants basically is a backup. If Taiwan ever falls, and there's a realistic reality that it might, you need to be able to continue having modern 21st century technology. And so it's best to start constructing some of those highly automated plants in a safer environment here in the United States. And that's also happening in Canada. It's also happening in Europe. It's happening in Australia. So, yeah.
Is Taiwan sort of like Hawaii in the United States together, like how it's an island, and then you got the United States and you got China and Taiwan? Is that's how they're trying to make Taiwan a part of China, right?
Well, yeah. Remember, people ended up, the island of Formosa was basically uninhabited before the late 1940s. During and after World War II, there was the Chinese Civil War because Japan invades China. The Chinese imperial government collapses in 1937. A civil war breaks out between the Chinese communists led by Mao and the Chinese nationalists led by a guy named Chiang Kai-shek. Mao won, communists on mainland China won. Chiang Kai-shek and his buddies went to Formosa, which we now call Taiwan. So they've never been one country. This whole thing is the result of a civil war that happened when my father was 5 years old. This has been going on for decades. So Hawaii, with the United States, we annexed Hawaii and jailed their royal family. That's its own screwed up history. And Hawaii eventually became a state. With China and Taiwan, that conflict is the next chapter of the Chinese Civil War that ended in 1948 with the ascension of Mao.
One last question, and then we're going to move on to where you see yourself going in the future.
Yeah.
What do they want with Taiwan? If Taiwan is a small country, what do they want with it? Taiwan,
it's a matter of national pride.
I agree.
It's a matter of national pride. China wants all of China under one roof, under the CCP flag.
Over here.
Yes. It was the same thing with Hong Kong coming back from the British. This is just another... Taiwan is basically, because it was started as a civil war, Taiwan is unfinished business. And any Chinese leader who could get Taiwan back will be a hero, a national hero, and a legend for time and all eternity. Because, again, it's the result of an unfinished civil war between the communists and the nationalists. So it's really a matter of prestige.
Here's the thing. Even if they get Taiwan back, it really doesn't matter. They have all of China, and it's more to it than that. And I feel like, Taiwan is its own separate, let it be its own separate country so that they can both have two different stories to tell the Asians. The Asians are doing good. Their manufacturing is off the charts. When I went to Korea, I know China is around Korea, but when I went to Korea, I was in Seoul, near Seoul, and what I did was I was in the military, and I sat up there, and their phones was 10 years ahead of us. They're very smart people, and I just don't get why, he's so invested in this. And like you said, he wants to be the person that talks about beyond this time, but he's hurting a lot of people that want to see Taiwan grow.
It's really a matter of national pride. I mean, Taiwan has done tremendously well. They were a gaggle of a few 100,000 people, mostly poor farmers and some skilled tradespeople that arrived on a gaggle of fishing boats. I mean, it was worse than the evacuation of Dunkirk, in 1948, having just lost a civil war to Mao Zedong. And they have turned an island that has no natural resources, isn't incredibly fertile, into this wonderful, modern, westernized democracy. And very wealthy. The Taiwanese have a lot of money. And so I'm sure the money is partly appealing. The manufacturing capabilities are certainly appealing to the Chinese as well. But really, it's a matter of national pride. It's unfinished business. It is the breakaway country or breakaway province, as Beijing would put it, of the Chinese Civil War, a conflict that was never resolved. And that's why Taiwan continues to be a contentious issue.
So Donald Trump, when Donald Trump was in office, there was no war against Taiwan and China. There was like a undercut war, but there was nothing really going on. Every country was not, at war. So tell me,
that's not really true. I mean,
Tell,
that's a news narrative.
go ahead. Tell me
No, I
about
mean, no, I mean
Taiwan and
that's a news narrative.
Trump.
The whole idea that somehow the world was more peaceful under Trump was not a matter of anything Trump did. It was a matter of luck. Also, most of Trump's presidency happened before the pandemic. The conflicts we've talked about today have fomented after the pandemic. Taiwan has been an issue, like I said, since 1948. China's issue with Taiwan did not start during Trump's presidency, and it's not going to finish under. It didn't finish under his. It's not going to finish under this one. That is a long-standing, decades-old conflict. Trump gets to say, "Oh, we didn't have all of these wars because it was a matter of luck." George Bush could have said, someone in John Kerry in 2004 could have said the same thing about the Bush administration. Well, in 1999 under Clinton, we didn't have all these wars. Well, 9/11 hadn't happened yet either. So that's not really a salient argument. It's what people like to make because, for better or for worse, Putin chose to invade Ukraine. Hamas chose to attack a music festival and many other people on October 7th. Those things could have just as easily happened in the Trump administration as it did under Biden. The problem, and here's the big difference, is Biden is trying to defend freedom, democracy, the liberal order, and the alliance system that the United States has painstakingly built since 1945. Under the Trump administration, Ukraine would no longer be a country. It would be part of Russia. And under the Trump administration, there would not be a single living Palestinian left. You think the genocide is bad under the Biden administration? Trump would let Israel have our most potent weapons, and there would be no more Palestinians left to be found. That would be a complete genocide. So in my mind, if you're worried about dead people in Gaza, you should vote for Biden because he'll kill fewer of them than Trump would. If you don't want Russia to annex most of Eastern Europe and restart the Cold War, you might want to not vote for Trump because the reality is Trump would just let Putin have all of Ukraine. And that would bring Russia right up to NATO's border, which it was anyway because Finland has now joined NATO, so has Sweden, so were the Baltics, all this type of thing. And so Trump gets to claim credit like these things were true for him, and they were, but not for anything he did. It was just a matter of luck and timing.
Okay, we'll just have to wait to see if he becomes president, what happens. And if he do, but if anything like what you said happens, I'm inviting you back on the show and we're going to have a totally different conversation. Where do you see yourself going in the future, Cameron?
Well, in the immediate future, this fall, I have 2 new books coming out. What the Hell is Going On Post-COVID Edition, and America's Lost Generation, that tells the story of millennials and the Great Financial Crisis through the lens of Japanese young people in 1991 who also went through a financial crisis. We have great videos and whatnot coming out every Monday at CameronJournal.com and new content during the week. And I have new writing courses coming out, so I just want to keep going on this train of doing a good job of helping people understand that the world may be complicated, but at least the Cameron Journal is not.
I cannot wait to read some of your material. Tell me about how the people can find you, and then we'll end there.
Yep, so you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Cameron Cowan. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan. And I'm also on Pinterest as well if you want to go see some of my more creative photo stuff. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me. I do a newsletter twice a month on business trends and futurism. So make sure to go find me at LinkedIn, Cameron Cowan. And and if you don't want to write down all those links, just head over to CameronJournal.com. They're all right there for you.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for joining my show. Stay on the line. You guys, you take care, man. Like, this guy is so smart. He like the brain whiz kid. So you take care, y'all. Be safe, and I'll be back on here a little bit later. Thank you.